I thought Thanksgiving would finally be my moment. After years of being treated like the invisible one in my husband's family, this was supposed to be my chance to show that I belonged. I spent 2 full days planning, shopping, chopping, basting, and sweating over a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon, butter, and roasted turkey. By the time the dining room was set candles flickering, the table glowing with gold runners and polished silverware, I was exhausted but proud. When everyone sat down, my heart raced. I waited for that first bite, for someone to say, "Wow, this is amazing." Maybe even for my mother-in-law, Sandra, to finally admit that I had done something right. Instead, she lifted her wine glass, smiled with that perfectly rehearsed grin of hers, and said, "This is my recipe. Everyone loves it, don't they?" The words cut sharper than any carving knife. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly, but then she repeated it, louder this time, with a laugh that pulled every pair of eyes to her. "Yes, this is the one I've been making for years. Secret marinade. Always a hit." I felt my face flush hot, though the room itself was drafty from the open window near the table. My fork hovered above my plate, trembling slightly in my hand. My husband Mark glanced at me quickly, then down at his food, pretending he hadn't noticed. My kids were too busy piling mashed potatoes onto their plates to sense the storm brewing. I tried to smile. I even managed a little laugh, though it came out hollow. Inside, it was as if someone had poured ice water straight into my chest. All those hours marinating the turkey, double-checking the timing, following handwritten notes I'd taped on the fridge, it was as if they evaporated in that instant. Gone, erased, stolen by a woman who never lifted a finger in that kitchen. Across the table, my brother-in-law raised his glass and said, "Classic Mom, you really nailed it again." He winked. Sandra beamed, soaking in the praise, not even glancing at me. I pressed my napkin against my lap, my knuckles white from the grip. It reminded me of being back in high school, when a teacher would hand back an essay and call it excellent, while praising someone else for it. The same heat of humiliation, the same tightening in the throat. And yet, I stayed quiet, because that's what I'd been trained to do over the years. Smile, nod, let it go. But the silence inside me was different this time. It wasn't compliance, it was calculation. I looked around the table. The golden glow of candles flickered against faces that seemed oblivious to my shock. Sandra's pearl earrings glimmered as she tossed her hair back, clearly enjoying her moment. The clinking of silverware against plates filled the pause that followed her announcement. For them, it was just another Thanksgiving. For me, it was the moment the ground shifted. I thought about the countless Thanksgivings I had pictured growing up, watching commercials of happy families carving turkey with laughter echoing in the background. My reality was nothing like that. Here, the turkey was perfect, but the credit had been hijacked. I adjusted in my chair, crossing my legs to hide the restless tapping of my foot. Mark finally looked at me again, just for a second, his lips parting like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage. Then he stabbed his green beans and chewed in silence. Sandra leaned toward Aunt Carol, lowering her voice just enough to make it sound conspiratorial. "I told her years ago the trick is the brine. Overnight, sea salt, a touch of brown sugar, it locks in the flavor." She said it like she was letting the family in on a sacred secret. I nearly laughed, because the only reason that bird was moist was the gallons of chicken stock I'd basted it with at 3 a.m. while everyone else was sleeping. My chest tightened, not with rage, but with something sharper. Clarity. This wasn't a one-off. This was a pattern. Sandra had done it before. Claimed the desserts I baked, the side dishes I stayed up late preparing, even the decorations I picked out. Each time, she got the applause. Each time, I told myself to let it slide. Keep the peace. Don't ruin the holiday. But this time felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way Mark looked away, offering no defense. Or maybe it was just the fact that I finally realized I had proof. See, I'd been documenting everything, every marinade, every recipe card, every late-night step in the process. I had text threads with friends asking for advice, photos saved on my phone of the turkey in the oven, videos of me stirring the cranberry sauce. Not for revenge, just because I like to keep memories, maybe share them later. But now, Those little receipts burned in my pocket like a loaded weapon waiting to be drawn. I lifted my glass and sipped the wine, letting the tartness bite my tongue. Outwardly, I looked calm, almost detached. Inside, I was rewinding through every word Sandra had just claimed, stacking them against the images in my phone. The contrast was almost comical. Across the table, the kids started giggling over dinner rolls. Butter smeared on their cheeks. Uncle Joe leaned back, patting his stomach like he'd just tasted heaven itself. "Best Thanksgiving in years," he declared. Sandra accepted the compliment with a modest shrug, like she wasn't glowing with satisfaction. And I sat there, still, my pulse steadying as a plan formed. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't raise my voice. That's what she wanted. A spectacle. Something to use against me later. No, this time I'd wait. Let her bask. Let her think she'd won. Because Thanksgiving wasn't over. Dessert was still coming. And so was my turn. I didn't know it yet, but that one small lie, that one brazen theft of credit, was about to unravel everything Sandra had carefully built. By the end of the night, she wouldn't be the admired matriarch holding court over her recipes. She would be exposed, and she would know exactly who pulled the rug out from under her. The dining room that night looked like something straight out of a holiday magazine. Candles flickered in tall glass holders, casting golden light across a table set with plates that only came out once a year. The smell of roasted turkey still lingered, layered with hints of cinnamon from the pumpkin pies cooling on the counter. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, the kind that makes windows fog and cheeks burn pink after a quick step in from the driveway. Inside, though, it was warm, too warm, like the heat had been cranked up to match the forced cheer in the room. Everyone was there. Sandra, of course, sitting at the head of the table like a queen presiding over her court. Her pearl necklace caught the candlelight every time she leaned forward to claim another compliment. My father-in-law, Robert, sat beside her, quietly spooning cranberry sauce onto his plate. He barely spoke but chuckled at all the right moments, the kind of background character who supported Sandra's spotlight. Across from me sat Mark, my husband, still chewing like every bite required his full concentration. Our kids were sandwiched between us, giggling and sneaking olives from the appetizer plate when they thought no one was watching. My brother-in-law, Greg, leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually as if he owned the place. He raised his glass often, always in Sandra's honor. His wife, Melissa, clung to his every laugh, chiming in at the right moments. Then there was Aunt Carol, who lived for gossip, her eyes darting from one person to the next, like she was waiting to file a full report to whoever would listen later. From the outside, it might have looked like the perfect Thanksgiving. A big family, plenty of food, warm lights, polite laughter. But sitting there, I could feel the cracks, the undercurrent of something sharp, hidden just below the surface. It was in the way Sandra's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. In the way Mark avoided meeting my gaze, like he already knew I was counting how many times he hadn't defended me tonight. When I'd first agreed to host Thanksgiving this year, I thought it would be different. I imagined laughter in the kitchen, everyone pitching in, the kind of chaos that turns into warm memories later. I thought maybe, just maybe, Sandra would be proud of me, or at least acknowledge the effort. She had even sounded warm on the phone weeks earlier. "It'll be nice for you to handle things this year," she had said. "I'll just bring the wine." I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe she meant it, but the signs had been there. She had dropped by the night before, just to check in, and walked straight into the kitchen without removing her coat. She leaned over the roasting pan like an inspector and said, "Smells good. Did you remember to brine it overnight?" Her tone wasn't curious, it was loaded, like she was daring me to admit I'd missed something. When I said yes, she gave a tight smile and replied, "Well, that's the most important step. Without that, it's always dry." Then she left, not offering to help, just leaving that comment hanging in the air like a warning. Even tonight, little hints had been dropped before her big declaration. When Greg asked about the stuffing, Sandra piped up with, "It's the family recipe, always a favorite." I blinked, because the only recipe she had given me was a vague mention of bread cubes and seasoning. The stuffing on the table was my work entirely. Sausage browned, onions caramelized, sage chopped fresh, hours of labor. Yet she claimed it like she had been in the kitchen beside me. Still, I had brushed it off. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit. What mattered was that people enjoyed the food, that the evening went smoothly, that the kids laughed and the family left full. That's what I thought. That's what I wanted. But the little signs piled up quickly. Sandra's comments about her brine, her hand waving casually when someone asked about the sweet potatoes. Oh, I always say, just add enough butter and you can't go wrong. She didn't even glance my way as she said it, as if I didn't exist. Each remark chipped at the wall I had built inside, the one that kept me from reacting. What stung most wasn't just Sandra's words. It was how easily everyone else accepted them. Robert nodded like it was fact. Greg raised his glass again, toasting to Mom's famous turkey. Aunt Carol whispered, "She never loses her touch," with a smile that wasn't meant for me. Not one person questioned it. Not even Mark, who sat there pushing food around his plate, pretending not to hear. I sat in silence, watching them laugh and chew and praise Sandra, as if she had orchestrated it all. The golden lights blurred for a second, my eyes stinging, but I blinked it away. No one would see me cry at that table. Instead, I replayed every step of the day in my mind, the chopping, the seasoning, the careful timing, the 5 a.m. wake-up call to check the oven. The pride I had felt when I pulled the turkey out, golden and perfect, juices sizzling. All of it invisible now, erased by one smug declaration from Sandra. But beneath the sting, there was something else simmering. Not rage, not even sadness anymore. It was resolve. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew this. The night wasn't over, and neither was I. This wasn't the first time Sandra had taken something from me and made it her own. That's the part that stung the most. Not the turkey, not the stuffing, not even the casual way she erased me from the story of this meal. It was the fact that I'd seen this act before, in smaller doses, in moments that seemed harmless until they stacked into a pattern too obvious to ignore. I thought back to last year, at Greg's birthday party. I had stayed up the night before, decorating a cake with layers of chocolate ganache, whipped cream, and strawberries arranged like a crown on top. Mark had even joked that I should start a bakery. The cake looked so good. But when Sandra carried it into the dining room, she announced with pride, "This is my special cake. I've been making it since the kids were little." Everyone clapped, cameras flashed, and Greg took the first bite while declaring, "Nothing beats Mom's cake." I stood there smiling, clutching the knife I'd just used to slice strawberries, my name erased as if I'd never touched the dessert. And then there was Christmas Eve 2 years ago. I had spent the entire day preparing the living room garland hung, stockings stuffed, a tree twinkling in the corner. When the guests arrived, Sandra greeted them first. She spread her arms wide and said, "I always make sure the house feels magical this time of year." I had to bite my tongue so hard I tasted copper, because she hadn't lifted a single ornament out of a box. She hadn't hung one string of lights, but she took the credit, and no one questioned it. I even remembered something as small as the 4th of July barbecue. I had made potato salad from scratch, peeling and boiling, mixing in mustard and dill, tasting until it was perfect. Sandra leaned across the picnic table, winked at her neighbor, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "That's my recipe. Of course. She just helps." As if I were a kitchen assistant, some invisible pair of hands in her great culinary empire. Every memory had the same flavor. Me working, her basking. Me silent, her applauded. I used to tell myself it wasn't worth the fight. I thought keeping peace in the family was more important than hearing my name attached to something as trivial as potato salad. But every time I swallowed that silence, a little piece of me went with it. Sitting there at the Thanksgiving table, I realized just how much resentment had been stored away like leftovers nobody wanted to eat. It wasn't just tonight, it was years of erasure. Years of being the invisible daughter-in-law who only existed in the shadows of Sandra's stories. And what made it worse was the way everyone played along. Robert never corrected her, not once. He always nodded, letting her narrative stand like law. Greg never noticed, or maybe he noticed, but didn't care, because anything that praised his mother made him feel proud. Aunt Carol fed on Sandra's stories like they were dessert, repeating them to anyone who'd listen, never once questioning the details. Even Mark, my husband, the one person who should have spoken up for me, always chose silence. He'd tell me later when it was just us, "It's not worth the drama. You know how she is," as if that excused it, as if my feelings didn't matter, as if the humiliation was just part of the package of marrying into this family. I used to think maybe Sandra didn't mean it, that maybe she just got carried away, or maybe she didn't realize how much it hurt me. But as I sat there that night, watching her soak in every ounce of praise, I knew better. She knew exactly what she was doing. The smirk in her eyes whenever she looked at me, the way she turned her back so quickly after taking the credit, it wasn't ignorance. It was deliberate. And the truth hit me like a cold splash of water. She wasn't just erasing me from one dinner, one cake, or one holiday. She was erasing me from the family narrative altogether. In her version of this household, she was the matriarch who did it all, who held everything together, who cooked and cleaned and decorated and hosted. And I was nobody. That realization settled heavy in my chest, but it also lit something inside me, a spark that burned brighter than the humiliation. I wasn't angry in the way I used to be. I wasn't about to cry in the bathroom and let the evening pass. Number. This time, I was awake. This time, I saw the game for what it was, and I wasn't going to let it slide into history again. Sandra had built her image carefully, brick by brick, lie by lie, on the backs of people who stayed quiet. But she underestimated me. She thought I was still the daughter-in-law who would nod, smile, and let her take the spotlight. She thought wrong, because tonight wasn't just about a turkey. Tonight was about every stolen credit, every false claim, every time she'd looked me in the eye and dismissed me without a second thought. And I knew something she didn't. I had proof. The clinking of forks against porcelain grew louder as the table fell into a rhythm of chatter and chewing. For everyone else, it was just Thanksgiving dinner, another round of Sandra's triumphs. For me, it was a stage where I had been cast as the ghost. Sandra leaned forward, swirling the red wine in her glass. Her pearls swung lightly as she tilted her head toward Aunt Carol. "The trick to the turkey is patience," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I always tell the girls, never rush the brine, that's the secret." She lifted her glass and smiled, basking in the glow of admiration. The words burned, not just because they were untrue, but because she delivered them with such ease, as though the truth had never existed. Her hands never touched that turkey, yet her story rolled off her tongue like she had stayed up all night basting it. My jaw tightened, and I pressed my napkin harder into my lap, the fabric crumpling in my fist. Greg raised his glass again, always the dutiful son. "To Mom," he said, his voice warm with pride. "Still the best cook in the family," Melissa chimed in. "Absolutely, Sandra. Everything is perfect." Their voices blurred together in my head, a chorus of agreement that erased me completely. My pulse quickened, my skin hot, despite the chill seeping from the drafty window. I glanced at Mark. He looked down, his fork scraping across his plate as though he could dig an escape route into the porcelain. Not a word, not even a glance of solidarity. Sandra's laugh rang out, sharp and cutting. "I just love seeing everyone enjoy what I've made. Makes the work worth it." She turned to Robert, who smiled faintly, nodding in agreement as if this had always been her truth. Inside, I felt myself split in two. On the surface, I managed a polite smile, the picture of grace. But beneath that mask, my thoughts raced. I remembered every photo I'd taken over the past 2 days, my hands basting the turkey, flour dusting the counter, as I kneaded rolls, the timer glowing 3:07 a.m. as I stirred gravy under the dim kitchen light. Proof. Silent, undeniable proof. And in that moment, I realized I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to argue. I didn't even have to raise my voice above the clatter of silverware. All I had to do was show them. I slid my hand into my pocket, fingertips brushing the cool glass of my phone. My breath steadied. This wasn't rage anymore. It was precision, a plan unfolding with the clarity of a sharpened blade. Across the table, Aunt Carol leaned forward, wide-eyed. "Sandra, how do you keep the turkey so juicy? Mine always turns out dry." Sandra smirked, pleased with the cue. Well, Carol, it's all about knowing the oven. You can't just rely on the timer, you have to listen to the bird, feel it. That's something you only learn after years of experience. The table laughed, nodding, eating it up like gospel. I nearly laughed too, at the absurdity of it, because while Sandra claimed to listen to the bird, I was the one who had listened to the alarm at dawn, who had basted and basted until my arms ached, who had hovered over the oven thermometer like it was a newborn. The irony was suffocating, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I reached under the table and tapped my screen. A swipe, a few clicks, and I had the group chat open, the one where I'd sent Mark pictures of the turkey mid-prep, where I'd documented every step in my determination to get it right this year. Sandra's voice droned on, filling the space with her performance. It's really about instinct, she concluded, raising her chin. And of course, love. You can taste the love. I almost choked on my wine. Love. If love had been in that kitchen, it wasn't hers. The room seemed smaller, the candlelight brighter, every detail magnified. Robert coughed into his napkin. The kids were busy stacking peas into little towers. Greg reached for another roll, his laughter booming at something Melissa whispered, and there was Sandra, at the center, glowing, certain she had won again. I took a long breath, exhaled slowly, and pressed one final button on my phone. The television in the living room flickered on, its glow spilling into the dining room doorway. Conversations faltered. Forks paused midair as heads turned toward the sudden light, and there it was, my kitchen, on full display. A video of me pulling the turkey from the oven, steam rising, my hair tied back, apron smeared with flour. Photos followed in a neat slideshow, the mixing bowls, the brine bath, the trays of chopped vegetables. Every detail, every step, time-stamped and undeniable. The room went silent, utterly silent. Sandra froze, her glass of wine halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened, then darted toward me, searching for a crack in my expression. But I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just smiled. The slideshow played in silence, each image lingering just long enough for the truth to sink in. My hands basting the turkey, the timer glowing at 5:12 a.m., the stuffing mixed in the biggest bowl I owned, the pies cooling, steam curling off their crusts. Every photo was a receipt, every video a nail in the coffin of Sandra's story. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The television spoke for me, louder than I ever could. The first sound to break the silence was a soft gasp from Aunt Carol. She pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes darting between the screen and Sandra. Oh my, Greg chuckled awkwardly, trying to bridge the growing gap. Well, hey, Mom probably just meant she supervised, right? She gave tips. His words dangled in the air, weak and unconvincing. Sandra's cheeks flushed crimson. She forced a laugh, brittle and high. Of course. I was guiding the whole time. She was just following my recipe. The slideshow shifted to a screenshot of the group chat where I had texted Mark, "Should I add more sage or thyme to the stuffing?" Followed by his single-word reply, "Sage. No Sandra. No guidance. Just me, working it out in real time." Melissa squirmed in her seat, setting her fork down with a clink. That looks pretty detailed for just following directions. Robert cleared his throat, the sound heavy in the silence. "Sandra," he began, but his voice trailed off when she shot him a look sharp enough to cut steel. Mark finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "She cooked it all, Mom. Every bit of it." The words landed like stones. Sandra's smile faltered, her mask slipping for the first time. She blinked at him, searching for support, but he didn't look away this time. For once, he was on my side. I set my glass down gently, the sound crisp against the wood of the table. "Funny," I said, my tone even, calm. "I don't remember you there at 3 a.m, Sandra, or standing over a hot stove for hours, do you?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She reached for her wine, but didn't drink. Her hand trembled just enough to make the liquid ripple in the glass. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the television as another photo flashed across the screen, me sprinkling salt, the caption I had added for myself. "Almost done. Hope they like it." Sandra drew in a breath, squaring her shoulders. "Well," she said finally, voice clipped, Maybe I misspoke. I was only trying to honor tradition. This meal is part of me, part of my history. I suppose she gestured toward me with a quick flick of her hand, executed it this time. But the heart of it, the soul, is mine. Aunt Carol tilted her head, her lips pursed. Honey, those pictures don't look like soul. They look like sweat. A ripple of laughter broke out around the table. Small, nervous, but enough. Sandra's face hardened, her jaw tightening as she realized the ground beneath her was slipping. I leaned forward just slightly, my eyes locked on hers. It's okay. You don't have to admit anything. Everyone saw the truth for themselves. Melissa shifted uncomfortably, her gaze dropping to her plate. Greg muttered something about football and reached for another roll, desperate to escape the tension. But no one followed his lead. The energy in the room had shifted, and it wasn't moving back. Sandra tried again, softer this time, her voice almost pleading. You have to understand, I've been the one holding this family together for decades. The meals, the holidays, the traditions, they're all me. If I don't keep that, then what do I have? Her words lingered in the heavy air. For the first time, I saw something crack in her. Not rage, not arrogance, but fear. I could have driven the knife deeper. I could have listed every holiday, every stolen moment, every time she had erased me, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned back, folded my napkin neatly, and offered a smile that was anything but warm. Next year, I said lightly, maybe I'll let you actually cook. The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra's face drained of color. Robert looked away. Aunt Carol hid a smirk behind her glass. Even the kids, sensing the shift, stayed quiet, their peas abandoned on their plates. The power Sandra had always wielded the spotlight, the admiration, the easy authority was gone. Not with a scream, not with a fight, but with a slideshow and a single sentence she couldn't argue against. And for the first time in years, I felt the balance tip. The room never fully recovered after that moment. Dinner limped on, plates half finished, conversations fractured into awkward fragments. The football game murmured from the television in the living room, but nobody really watched. The slideshow still sat paused on the screen, frozen on an image of me pulling pies from the oven, my apron dusted white with flour. It was proof that could not be unsaid, undone, or ignored. Sandra barely touched her food after that. She nibbled at green beans, eyes fixed on her plate, her wine glass emptied and refilled more than once. Every so often she attempted a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. The shine, the certainty, the effortless authority she carried like a crown, it was gone. Robert sat stiff beside her, his fork moving without much appetite. Aunt Carol for once stayed quiet, her lips pressed tight as if she were afraid anything she said might spark another fire. Greg tried to talk about the weather, then about gas prices, but his voice trailed off into silence when no one joined in. Melissa gave him a weak smile, but even she seemed more interested in the cranberry sauce than in his chatter. Mark sat straighter than I'd seen him all evening. He didn't say much, but the way he glanced at me finally, with something that looked like pride, was enough. It wasn't a public defense, not a grand gesture, but it was something. And after years of silence, that small shift mattered. As dessert plates were passed, no one dared to comment on whose recipe the pies were. The cinnamon scent filled the air, rich and sweet, but nobody praised Sandra this time. Instead, people ate quietly, their eyes flicking toward me in ways they hadn't before. A nod from Aunt Carol, subtle but unmistakable. A faint smile from Melissa, as though she was silently admitting she had suspected the truth all along. And Sandra? She didn't touch dessert at all. She sat with her back straight, her pearls still glinting under the candlelight, but her hands were restless, her eyes distant. It struck me then she wasn't just humiliated. She was adrift. For so long, her power came from the illusion that she was the center of every holiday, the architect of every memory. Tonight, that illusion shattered. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. The evidence had spoken louder than I ever could, and, as much as part of me wanted to deliver one final sting, another part of me knew I didn't have to. Silence, this time, was my weapon. When the last plates were cleared and coats were pulled on, The air was colder, sharper, even inside. People left with awkward hugs, murmuring thanks that sounded more like apologies. Greg clapped Mark on the back, avoiding my eyes. Aunt Carol squeezed my hand a little too tightly and whispered, "Well done," before disappearing into the night. Sandra didn't look at me as she left. She simply adjusted her coat, lifted her chin, and walked out the door with Robert trailing behind. She hadn't lost her dignity completely, she wouldn't allow that, but she had lost something far greater: control of the story. When the door clicked shut, the house was quiet. The kids were already upstairs, laughing over their own inside jokes, oblivious to the tension that had crackled all night. Mark lingered by the sink, rinsing plates without saying a word. Finally, he turned, drying his hands on a towel, and said softly, "I should have spoken up sooner." I met his eyes. For a moment, the anger I had carried melted into something else, relief, maybe even gratitude. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He knew. Later, when the candles burned low and the house was finally still, I sat alone at the table, staring at the crumbs scattered across the gold runner. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude, about family, about tradition. Instead, it had shown me something else: the truth about power, silence, and the stories people tell to protect themselves. Sandra wanted to be remembered as the woman who built every holiday with her bare hands. But after tonight, she would be remembered differently. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because I let the truth speak for itself. And as for me, I realized something too. Sometimes silence is strength, but sometimes breaking it just once, at the right moment, changes everything. I don't know if Sandra will ever forgive me, or if she'll even try. I don't know if Mark will find the courage to stand taller next time, or if his defense will always come too late. What I do know is that this Thanksgiving ended a cycle. I'm not invisible anymore. And maybe that's enough. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. These moments aren't just about food or holidays, they're about the hidden battles so many of us fight behind the smiles and the perfect tables. If you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or silenced, I hope this story reminded you that your truth matters too. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, real, raw, and sometimes messy, don't forget to subscribe. Because, trust me, this isn't the last time family drama turns a holiday into something unforgettable.